Hey, Ann, thanks so much for joining me on a well-designed business today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, LuAnn. I've been really looking forward to this.
Yeah, so I'm excited because when I read your intake form, first of all, it was so clear to me that you're a longtime listener of the show, which we're going to talk about some of the episodes that have had the most impact on you as an interior design business owner. But that you, like, after a 35-year career, started your career as an interior designer at 60 years old. And, I started the podcast at 53, and people think that was old to start. Being in the 60s myself now, I recognize that it really is that cliche as age is just a number. It is nothing
Mm-hmm.
else more than that. But, kind of cool starting a business at that point when a lot of our peers, especially peers that have had a professional career, quote unquote, not a self-employed career, right? Um, that, you go and start a business at 60 years old. What the heck, Anne? What is all of that about for you?
Well, it's something that I've always loved, and I know I've heard it so many times on your podcast. People will talk about like, "Oh, it's something that I always really loved doing," and I have funny stories from way back when I was really little, like laying in bed and thinking about the converted barn across the street and wishing that I lived in that house because it was super cool. And for some reason, I just, I don't know why. I'm not even sure that I knew that it was a profession. And when I first started my career as a speech pathologist, I remember thinking, oh, I think there should be something that, like, a service you could provide to somebody that really just wanted to use, like, I didn't even have this terminology like retail products but, like a Target kind of store that, you could put it together. But again, I didn't really have the language or the knowledge to do it. And, my career ended up being great. I worked for a long time, as you said, and, I was good for my family and I met lots of nice people, but I always loved design. And in fact, when I was working at my last job as a speech pathologist, like I was always talking to people like, oh, I want to do design, but, I had no idea how to start doing it. And I actually took Maria Killam's, color
Oh,
class like on
sure.
a whim. And that I think just gave me like one little nugget to start. And I don't know, like it's kind of took on a life of its own. And, I think one of the things that I'm really good at is once I start something, I don't quit. And so I started with not much knowledge, but I just kept going forward. So that's kind of how things started.
I love it. And how far into your journey did you find the podcast, curiously? In other words, had you already become a designer and started taking projects, or was this part of that research in the beginning of making the jump? Because I've had designers tell me both.
So I don't think that in fact, I know I did not know about your podcast before I started my business because I don't even think I knew what was out there. But
Okay.
I found it pretty early on. There was a couple of business of design podcasts, which I liked. The other one I listened to, but then I ended up somehow finding yours and just everything about it resonated with me. And I've said many times, I'm not sure I could have started my business without LuAnn because it was like going, you just, again, I didn't have a business background and you don't know what you don't know. And in some
Yeah.
ways, it's probably kind of good. Like, I'm not telling anybody to just jump in and do something with like, with no knowledge, but sometimes if you know too much, it's just overwhelming and scary. So, getting started and then having so much that came out on your podcast was really, really helpful. And I just was always super mindful of it's not good enough to listen to it. Like I have to think
Yeah.
through it and I have to, if I think it's important, I have to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, Anne, because that is the difference. There are tens of thousands of designers that listen and just listen again the following week, and it makes them feel comfortable and happy. And, they learn a little something and they feel and they understand that they are not alone. But there is another percentage that actually, like you said, okay, this is the thing. I know that I need this in my business. I know that I need this skill. I know I need to add this, or I have to pay attention to that, and then they stop and they take the time to actually implement the advice from our guests. So I love that you're in that percentage of
Mhm,
of
mhm.
listeners. you know Now, you mentioned to me in your intake form that one of the steps that you did take from listening to the show was hiring Desi Cresswell, who was a co-author in my second Power Talk Friday experts book. And what's so funny is, as you and I are talking right now today, 2 days ago, Desi and I were texting each other. So she's a
Aw.
terrific lady. Tell me about, you heard her on the podcast, and she just, something about her just hit a chord with you. Tell us about that journey and what you learned with working with Desi.
Sure. So I did hear on the podcast, and then I'd been thinking about a business coach, but again, probably like all business owners, there's always that, what's the return on investment? And, especially when you're just, first starting out and you really don't have money in your business account. Um, I was just worried about jumping in too soon. Um, but I think she just resonated with me, and then I decided I would do a discovery kind of call with her. And this is, I think, also an important piece of information that's always stayed with me. And I haven't checked her website recently, but she did not have any sort of a charge for her coaching services. And that's that's something that really has stayed with me, because I decided not to put fees on my website because of my experience with her. Because I know if I would have seen the amount, which now doesn't seem like that much, but for me at the time was a lot, I would not have called her. But she was so amazing on the phone, and you just so sold me on her services. And then, I kind of came away with, like, if I can't make up the amount of money that I'm going to invest in her in a year, I probably shouldn't even be doing this business. And
Right.
then I never looked back. And, some of the things that were, I think are the most important that I learned with her. There was a lot, but, was one, she helped me kind of niche down. And we came up with my tagline, which is the empty nest reimagined, which has actually worked pretty well for me.
Love
But
that.
yeah, and it's, because it's a lot of my people, that's the stage of life that they're in. But some of the other, like, really important things that I remember that I learned was, one, understanding the value that you bring to the table. Because honestly, I don't even know that I really knew what I brought to the table. And so it made it easy to undercharge, because if I don't value what I'm bringing, like, how can I ask somebody else to, pay me for that? So we went through, I mean, even I think there was an exercise of just, like, writing down all the things that I do. And I was like, whoa, I bring a lot to the table.
Yep.
And
Whoa is right.
so and I've told, my friends in the business, like, you've got to know what you bring to the table before you can tell anybody else what you bring to the table, and also believe that you have value. Um, and I'm trying to think, like, some things in terms of, like, just financial, like what I was charging. And I know she was kind of coaxing me to, like, even for my consultation, charge more. And I'm like, no, 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 I don't want to charge that much. And so I was like, bartering. Okay, I'll go up $25. And so now I'm considerably more for my consultation now than I was when I met with her. And I'm like, I don't even think twice about asking for it. I'm just like, of course, like, why wouldn't somebody want to hire me? And most
Right,
people
right.
do. So, I think that was another thing that, I really learned from her. And then also thinking about, like, what you really want, because this is another, I think, kind of funny story, because she's like, Anne, like, how much money do you want to make a year? And I'm like, $10,000. And
Oh my God.
she's like, do you really want to make that? Or is that all you think you can make? I'm like,
Yeah,
I
great
think that's
line,
all I
Desi.
think I can make. And I
Great
always look back, I'm
line.
like, why did I even say that? But I mean, yes, I make way more than that. So she was awesome. She was really,
Oh,
I've mentioned her in, some of the Facebook groups. I'm like, I've never regretted working with
oh.
her.
Desi has always been one of those that just lays some lines on me, like that line. That's a
Mhm.
great line. Like, okay, is that really what you want to make, or is it what you think you only could make? Right?
Mhm.
Like, because that's it. It's the fear talking there. It's the insecurity of a new career and a new venture, and not knowing what the possibilities could be. Right?
Mhm. 100%.
So good, so good. I love Desi. We'll link Desi's episodes in the show notes. She's been on a couple of times, and of course, she's in the Power Talk Friday book.
Mhm.
Okay, and then and Maria Killam has also been on the show before, so we'll link her episode in the show
Mhm.
notes as well. Okay, so lessons along the way, right?
Mhm.
So we've got to get our system and processes down. What did you do? What did you learn from the show? What did you learn on your own? Like, talk to us about the importance of that. You have to have done that. I know that you have, right?
Yes. Now, of course, I didn't start with that,
No.
because I didn't even have enough knowledge to know that I, I mean, I knew what a system and a process was, but I didn't really have an idea of how that would play out. So, I was just, you know, doing my best, I guess, to begin with. And I had some really great first few clients who were just so kind, and
Mm.
it just worked out really well, and it helped me get my feet wet. But just, well, I guess probably the most important podcast that I listened to was Sarah Lynn Brennan. And
Oh.
when I first listened to her, I was like, whoa, this is so amazing. Like, I want to run my business like that. And so I
Right.
sat down and I listened once, and then I listened again, and I took notes, and then I listened again and I took more notes. And then I have a little design group that I can talk about more later. Like, I made the group listen to it, and then we all talked about it. And then when I had COVID, I sat in bed and like did I basically, that was a few days that I had nothing else to do. And I just started really working on outlining my processes. And, I tweaked sort of the way Sarah Lynn Brennan does it. I actually added like one or two meetings just because it worked better for me, and I don't like to rush. But I got a system or a process that worked for me, and was able to, replicate that and have it in writing. And I made my own little policy and procedure book. And so,
What I love is I love what you just said in there, that you added 1 or 2 additional meetings that Sarah doesn't have. Sarah has a very defined process, and we will link the episode that you're talking about in the show notes, because it is a really good one. And I have to tell you, I remember when at that point, I had how many hundreds of interviews. And even at that point, when Sarah went through this happens on this day, and on this day, we make the appointment for that. And on this day, we know what day the team has to turn the design in, and the client has to show up. And on this day, the client makes payments. Like, when she went through it so clearly like that, I was like, whoa. Like, it just, as a consumer, and Sarah did the design at my office here remotely during COVID. And she's like, Lou, I'm going to put you through the front door, just like Sandra Funk taught us. All
mhm,
friends and family all come through the front door. And she goes, and you'll also get to experience the process. And as the aha for me, not the aha, but the impact for me was, number one, having that defined process as a designer just takes such a wild, hairy beast of design and tames it. Okay. But consumer facing, it was like, okay, I didn't have to email her and say what's going on. I know on this day this is going on. Right now, I'm going through a process with architectural design at my beach house with Anastasia Harrison. And it's so funny because I've been on the road for 12 days, 11, 12 days in Las Vegas. And I came back and I'm looking at my calendar. And my husband said to me at some point, he's like, well, what's going on with the beach house? I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, what do you mean you don't know? I'm like, Anastasia's got it. And I don't know. I said, but I'm sure there's a like I know Anastasia's a process. Like I wasn't that I wasn't sure there was a process. I said, I'm like, I'm sure it's in my calendar. And I looked at my calendar and a week from Wednesday, there's the design meeting plan.
Mhm.
Like I don't have to be like, oh my God, I just got into town and 50,000 things to do. And let me email my architect and find out what's going on. Like that's the beauty for the consumer when you guys are like, this is how I do it. This is when it happens. This is what you can expect. And bring your checkbook on these dates.
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
just like, okay, is this a checkbook meeting or not? Like, I don't care. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
so good.
exactly.
So, but what I love, and I got off on the whole tangent there, is
Mhm.
because what I love is that you do have to do the 80-20 rule. It's like what Sarah does works for me 80% of the way. But for me, meaning you, Anne, like I would feel better with an additional meeting or two in
Mhm.
between these two steps. And that is the beauty of being an entrepreneur. Make it right for you, but don't just be like, oh, well, I don't want to do those 8 steps or whatever, how many steps she has. So I guess that won't work. It's like,
Mhm.
make it yours. I love that, Anne. I love that you
Mhm.
did that.
Yeah, no,
You know?
it's been super helpful, and, also, like, there was a good example, like, with a recent client where, I mean, I have my process, on a little handout, and I give it to them, and I go over it, and it's the same process as in my contract. So, when I got to the last design meeting, which, they get the email that the balance is due on my design fee at that point, and then the husband was like, "Well, wait, no, this we haven't decided on this and that." And so it was really great because I was able to go back and say, we we talked about this, at the
We
last
talked
meeting,
about
and
this.
and his wife was like, "No, we've talked about this." And it all ended up great because I knew what my process was and I knew
Because
I
you
had
did talk
talked
about
about
it.
it.
And you
Yes, yes.
knew.
And it's didn't derail the project.
Right. I love that because it's, I've always talked about the ways over the years working with Billy, my partner at Window Works, when I was on the road selling window treatments, there were certain ways that I always talked about room darkening versus completely no light. Like what's room dimming, what's no light. And
Mhm,
there's just different things that we knew were the stick points that consumers would push back or forget, quote unquote, that we talked about. And so I had specific markers and specific language that I used that when Billy would just say, you mean she didn't talk about Las Vegas Dark with you? That's so weird. And then he'd see their light bulb.
mhm,
She did talk about that, right? Because I knew these were the problems, right? So it's the analogy to what you just said. It's like, you're not like, oh my God, did I remember to tell them this? Did I say this happens? I was like, no, I run a process. I would have told you about it. This is when I would have told you about it. And of course, you have the backup because you did say the wife also is like, no, I remember that meeting. It
mhm,
happened.
mhm,
Right. So awesome. That is the whole thing. Like I've said to you guys 1,000 times, I was not a system person. The Vincenzo's a system person.
mhm,
He's the one who made me do it. And in the beginning, I only did it because he told me to do it. And I was like, he told me what to do, so I had to do it. But then I would not do it. I would not do it over and over again. And what happened was I would find that I would be dropping balls
mhm,
and that, jobs wouldn't get done. And I would have to look at him and he'd be like, but did you this? And I'd be like, no, I didn't that. Right. And, and it just got to be like there was a point where I just did it to basically be able to say I did it. So when there was a mistake, I could say, well, I did the system. But the crazy thing is the more I followed the system, the less mistakes there were. And then I was like,
mhm.
oh. this works. This is
Right,
great.
right.
You know, like, okay. And then that's when you become the evangelist. You're just like, oh, I found
Yeah.
systems.
I love it.
Right? So that's awesome. I love it. Okay, so Sarah Brennan was an influential episode. That's great. And that's a learning lesson that you had along the way. I don't have system,
Mhm,
but it impacted you and yeah, it impacted you and it made you understand that it was important to do it, but you made it your own way. I love that too.
mhm.
What else in your journey and in starting this business at 60 plus, 60 years old, and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you started at 20 or 60. These are lessons that are timeless, but we're kind of like also kind of cooked at this point too.
Mhm.
So, what were some other ahas and lessons that you learned?
Well, the whole idea of money and budget,
Mm.
so, when I think about my first few projects, like, I don't know, I probably said maybe something about budget, but I really, I was just kinda like, "Oh, yeah, this looks good," and they like how it looks, and, they would pay what the products and whatnot. But I realized that I just happen to have some really easygoing first clients, but that people are gonna wanna know, and I'm not even talking about the design fee now, but just more like the overall, like, product budget if we're gonna do like a full, room redesign with furnishings. I start talking about that from the get-go, probably at the consultation. I have a design, it might have come from Nancy Ganzikoffer, I can't remember. I think it might have, like, was a Canva document that, then again, I've tweaked, and so kind of helping to build a budget. So, I'll do, and I think I'm throwing names around. I think it was Terry Taylor that talked about, like, the
Mm.
budget on the fly. So I'll take those
Yes.
numbers and, like, we'll talk about it right up front, like, just I'm like, here, I'm going to pick, numbers out of, like, our tool here. And, we know you're not going to spend $1,000 on a sofa, and we know you're not going to spend $10,000 on the sofa, but, here's kind of a moderate price. Are you okay with this? And then I go through and we just, like, all the things that we want to put in there. And then it comes out to a number. And I'm,
Yeah.
say it multiple times. This is not your budget. This is not the exact budget. This is just, are we playing in the same sandbox? And if you're
Yes.
like, whoa, this is 50,000 and I want to spend 5,000. Well,
Yeah, we
we're
have
not even in the right
we haven't
ballpark.
gone and sourced the entire room and wasted all that
Yes,
time, right?
yes, and if they're like, "Yeah, that seems reasonable," then I like, "Okay, good. Now we can move forward with that." So, I think, talking about budget upfront, having a budget, so, not to go off onto a tangent, but like in my second meeting design meeting, where we've done the concept and I've taken all their feedback and I come back and now I have, like, a design with specific products in there and it comes out to a certain budget, and then we have one more meeting where we can do tweaks, but now it's like, okay, it's going to be 52,000 or whatever, and as long as they're okay with that, then we can move forward. So, really try not to be afraid of the budget word. Again, I think it's just managing expectations up front, because if they don't want to pay that much, they're better to know that up front rather than do the work and then having, you're not being able to execute your design. So that's been really helpful. And then another thing, and I can't remember like who exactly said this, but I think it was Nancy, was when talking about, like, with your design fee. So I do use again, sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit, but I use Nancy's tool, the key, to come up with a flat fee. So this was like kind of this whoa aha moment. Then the first time I did it, I was like, I can't believe that this worked. But she talked about, like, doing the big number first, so like, here it's going to be 50,000, and now here is the design fee, which my design fee, not everybody does it this way, but it works for me. I do what I call, like, concept to completion. I don't want to ask for design money again. It's hard enough to ask
Yes.
for money once. So am I leaving money on the table? Maybe, but it works for me. I'm happy
Okay.
doing that. Um, So, I'm like, concept to completion, this is what it's going to cost. And somebody put this idea in my head too. Like, I'll say, think of it as insurance. Like, if you're going to spend $50,000, and then so many people come to me and they're like, well, we just spent all this money and we're still not happy with it. I'm like, I'm going to make sure
Mm,
that whatever hard earned money that you spend on all your products and your tradespeople or whatever, your total budget, my design fee, I'm going to do my absolute darndest to make sure that when you walk into that room at the end of the day, you are like, whoa, this is what I've been waiting for. This is what I like. Because why spend a bunch of money and still be unhappy?
right.
So,
Which happens when you don't have professional guidance. You make dumb mistakes, expensive mistakes, things that don't work. You know what I mean? Right.
mhm.
So I love that you frame it in the standpoint of, this is like your insurance policy, right?
Mhm, mhm. So, yeah,
That's pretty cool.
the first time I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do the big number first," and, it was like the biggest design fee I'd ever asked for. Because when I started, I'm like, "Well, who would pay me more than 199?" I had this, like, somehow an e-design number of 199 in my head, and it was, like, thousands of dollars that I asked for, which, again, seemed like a lot at that time. And they're like, sure, here it is. Like nobody, not, and I'm like, I called my friend on the way. I'm like, I can't believe it worked. And that project was such an amazing project. And I'm now like super good friends with them. It just was like super great, but it would never, it just would never have gone as smoothly. And I know I would not have been as profitable if I had not implemented those ideas.
Yeah, I love them, and there's a comment from my memory of the different episodes anyway. Nancy, has her key, her flat fee calculator or whatever it's called,
Mhm,
right? Um, and Nancy's been on the show obviously several times as co-author in the book and has lots of tools like that help. And the thing is, knowing Nancy as well as I do, I know exactly her goal. Her goal is to make it so that you can just walk through and do it and see that it works. And if you just trust her process and do it, then you're making the phone call to your friend like that. It
mhm,
worked, right?
mhm,
And I think, and I could be mistaken, but I think the whole presenting the big number and the smaller number, I think that's a Terry Taylor. And that doesn't mean that Nancy doesn't,
mm,
ascribe to doing that and any of the other business coaches out there. But I feel like that was a conversation of hers in one of her podcast episodes. And the other thing that I know came from Terry Taylor was in that conversation when you mentioned, like, well, what did you pay for your last sofa? Was it $500 or was it $25,000? Right? It's
mhm,
like, we can do a sofa for 1,500. We can do a sofa for 5,000. We can do a sofa for 20,000. Right? It's like she helps us with that language, help the consumer place them in a lane where they
mhm,
understand. But I also remember, I'm 90% sure it was one of her beginning episodes with me where I had an aha on air, where she was talking about how maybe a client is resistant to understanding that after we've done this, budget on the fly, that it's going to come up to 65,000 or $50,000 for this room. That she goes, and you're going to then have the layer of the client, who prospective client at this point, that is like, that's crazy, right?
mhm,
She said, but what you have to talk to them about is to look at any room in their home and recognize that they haven't probably spent a whole lot less than that, but they did it over time,
mhm,
and I was like, OMG. Because at that point, 700 interviews, I thought to myself, I would never be your guy's target client. Like, you're
mm,
never going to say, hey, Lou, we're going to spend 100K in your living room. And I'm like, let's sign up for that. I'm like, not me,
mhm.
not your girl. Like,
Right.
it's just not like something that I value. Right. But then when she said that, I was like, huh, but what was that rug? And what were those drapes? And what was that sofa? And I was like, son
Mhm,
of a gun. You know what
mhm,
I mean? And it's just, but I never did it like, here's the money, go buy the things all at once. It was like, Nigara, I finally want to get that perfect area rug that we've been saving money for.
mhm,
Okay, let's go. You know what I mean? And
mhm,
it's like, and what I understood, and the aha is that there are people that I want to say are like me, that had this belief that we don't spend money on our homes at the level that a luxury designer would ask us to. But the aha was that, yes, I did.
Mhm.
And at this point in my plus 60 years, with no more college payments and no more sneakers that I have to buy for children, if I ever wanted to do a home again, a room again, I would understand that I've always spent this kind of money on my house, but now I'm going to do it in one chunk. As an empty nester, I can. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
it's like, and that was a big, I think, lesson. And it's something I take the time to describe here because you have people out there that have the ability to do what they choose to do, and sometimes they don't recognize that they are that person. You know, am I
Mhm. Mm.
making sense? Are
Yeah.
you getting what
Mhm.
I'm
Of
saying?
course.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's the mindset. It's your own mindset, but you've got to get past the mindset of your consumer also and the crazy stories that they've told themselves. Right. When I sat there and thought about our one house that we built the house, back in 99, and it was like, the house, we finally made it. We're going to build our own house, a custom house, and blah, 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 blah. When I think what we spent on that house, like, stop,
Right.
stop. But, did it myself, went out and found the rug, went out and found the sofa, did one room and then next year did the other room, hundreds of thousands over the course of the 15 years of being in that house to decorate that house, but never felt it because I
Mhm.
didn't contract for it at one point. And how much better would it have looked if I had contracted with one of you guys to do it? Let's
Mhm.
be real. you know, we pulled it together, but like I know the difference of a curated room by a professional interior designer.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, so that's awesome. So, and then you told me off air, and I want you to tell the story about the Facebook group and Nancy and her key. Yeah, I just think that's such a crazy, like, I almost feel like this is going to be a trivia question one day when I finally have a game show.
Well, of course, like I've never win anything, and I do enjoy the Facebook groups because I like to see the questions people ask. Oh, we're looking for you know the the title of this you know flat fee tool, and so I'm like, oh, let me see if I can think of something. So, and I can't remember. I was the key, like the tagline was something like unlock your maximum product profits or something along that. And then
Wow.
I sent it in and I'm like, didn't really think about it. And then like the next day I look and I'm like, wait, there's my name. And it's not like I made it was a huge prize or anything, but I still feel like every time I see the key, I'm like, oh, I did that.
I love that. I love that. Do you know that I just had Power Talk Friday in Las Vegas recently? And we were talking about how do you come up with your fees, and are you do flat fee? Do you do, hourly? What it would do a combination or whatever? And one woman looked at me. She goes, I use Nancy Ganskow as the key. She goes, it works perfectly for me. I use it every time and I love it. So
Hmm.
it is like, you're going to have a legacy now. You're
Oh,
transcending time.
yay.
Oh my goodness. That's awesome. So I guess now let's spend everything that you've just expressed and you've learned from understanding the value of hiring a business coach sooner rather than later, that there's no reason to putz around in the dark for any weeks or months or years, that it always is valuable to hire whenever you finally get the thought in your head. It's time. It's probably that's the time to do it, right? Um, you've talked about the lessons that you've learned from Sarah Brennan and Nancy and Terry. What about is there anything specific? And like what I wanted to say about those is they're all timeless. It doesn't matter
Hmm.
if I'm 25 hearing that, if I'm 35, if I'm 65 hearing that. But is there anything that comes to mind for the person in their, say, mid to late 50s or 60s or even 70s that are like, I thought the ship sailed, that it's too late to start a design business. I listen to this podcast because I'm an enthusiast and I wish I had the courage to try to do it sooner, but it's too late. What do you want to say to that person, Anne?
Well, I think it's important that, if it's something that you really love and really want to do, you can do it. But it's not like you can just sit around and wait for it to fall into your lap, that you have to constantly be learning and I think networking is another thing. And I was going to mention this because I think this was like a really important part of my journey is after I hired Desi, I still wanted somebody that I could ask questions to. It's kind of like if you were working in an office, and you can ask your
Yeah.
coworker, but I didn't have anybody to ask. So I had met this woman because I worked at a consignment store. That was also another thing of just getting into retail, something that had to do with, furniture. And I met Jane Morgan, who I think you might know her. She's
Oh, yes, I
so,
do know Jane
and
very well.
she was probably like, "Oh, stop DMing me." But, we met for coffee
I
and
highly doubt that Jane ever had that thought in her head. I highly doubt that.
so we met, and then I ended up kind of hiring her as my mentor so I could, like ask her questions. And, she just, basically it was like buying a block of her hours. So, and then we got to be friends. And then there are two other women that actually I met both of them through at different times through like at the Maria Killam course. So
Mm,
there's now four of us. And I know you've talked about this on your podcast too about having a design group, but
mhm.
I cannot overstate the importance of my design group. They're like my besties now, like people I didn't even know like 4 years ago. We talk all the time. When there's anything that is an issue or a question, I mean, I actually got like a little teary. Somebody in our group like sent a text to the group. They were nervous about something that was happening, and like I think it was a light, a pendant light that she was like, "I'm freaking out. It's too big." Like 30
Oh,
seconds, all of us are like, "You've got this. You're the
yeah,
best." Like, and so I mean, it's been. I don't know that that would work for everybody, but for me, like having that support, circle of people that I really trust. And actually, it's an interesting group because two of us are in our 60s, two are in their 40s. Two of us are self-taught and two went to design school. So we kind of fill a
interesting
lot
mix.
of different, if there's something that one of us doesn't do as well, we can ask the other. So that's
Mm,
another thing is like find your people. And it can go on beyond like other designers. Like I love meeting people, and I've have some, particular like fabric houses and furniture people that I have built relationships with. And so, I think really don't be afraid to reach out. Not everybody's going to want to, be your friend, but, there's, you're going to find your people.
yeah. Well, and I love it because the truth is all of that advice also is so valid, whether you're, 30 or 60,
Mhm,
1000%. It's that I say it all the time, whether you're signing up to come to Power Talk Friday or LuAnn Live or a panel discussion at High Point, whatever it is, it's like it is the opportunity to get out of your box and meet somebody. What I like about the Power Talk Friday is it's an all day thing, or a LuAnn University class, it's 5 weeks. So you really have more than just 15 minutes before or after panel discussion. But the idea is we don't meet anybody if we don't come out. If we don't come
mhm,
out and do the things, whether it's virtually for a class like you're doing with the Shannon Williams class or whatever it is, because you don't need to do it alone. And gosh, why should you? Like, why should you? Right? I mean, even that text about the pendant light, I'm sure that the encouragement was outstanding to have that immediate, like, okay, take a breath. But I also guarantee that if there was also a legitimate problem, if it was legitimately too big, that one or all of the others of you are going to explain, okay, this is how you're going to handle it. You're going to like, reselect, and you're going to have to ask for like whatever. Like it's just getting you out of the the fear of the problem and getting somebody to move into logic, right? But right
mhm,
at that moment, we need somebody to help us get to the logic moment because right now it's just like, holy cannoli, I have
mhm,
a problem here, right? But if
mhm,
you are just in your own head and you can't have somebody that can pull you right back, that's tough, right? That's
mhm.
tough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, it's interesting because the group dynamic serves us in so many ways. Like when I think about even just like when I think about like I like at Window Works, we always make a joke. I'm the CCO, the chief complaint officer, right? Any kind of problem that escalates, then they call me, because I do have this uncanny ability to sit side by side. And I call it's like watching a movie. It's like, okay, what is happening here between us and what we're delivering and what this person is getting and experiencing in the delivery of that? And where are the problems that we took wrong turns, they took wrong turns, and I just kind of get very logical and analyze it, right? But that doesn't mean that it doesn't piss me off sometimes. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? And the thing is, it's I'm not alone here. I'm looking at, JC, or I'm looking at Kim, and we're just like, okay, we just let's all have our, crazy, complain fest about this. Let's,
Mhm.
how this isn't right, and we did all the right things and blah blah blah. And it's just a place to vent it, because I know that when I come to any type of problem, I have to have all of the emotion out of the way, because that is the leverage I have in that CCO conversation, is that now
Mhm.
I am without the emotion. I'm looking for the solution. But if I were a solopreneur running a window treatment company on my own, what am I, staring at the four walls screaming? And by the way, I would scream at the four walls. I mean, I've done it,
Mhm.
but that I love whenever I hear those of you that have found your people and have them for the technical support, the emotional support, the business support, all the things, because I don't think there's any reason to do it alone. I really don't. I
Mhm.
think I think it's lunacy to even try, quite
Mhm.
frankly.
Yep, and it's more
Yeah.
fun. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Exactly, exactly. The wins are better when they're shared, and the failures aren't as great when you can like help somebody can help you get to the lesson in them right away, right?
yeah, absolutely.
I love it. I love it. So, big dreams for your business. We're not looking to make $10,000 a year anymore, right?
No, no, not at all. And, some people like well, some friends like from the past. I mean, I think people can sometimes underestimate what I'm doing. They're like, "Oh, it's a cute
Yeah.
little hobby that you have." And I'm like, "It's fun." Oh, that's another thing that from I'm going to go back like with Desi, like cuz I think sometimes when it's fun, I had that idea that if I enjoyed doing it that it made it less valuable. Like that was
Uh-huh.
another thing is just because you like it and you might be doing it anyway doesn't mean that you aren't sharing your value. And so I think I've gotten a lot better about that. But that's what I always say, like, I know what you mean when you say it's a hobby. You're saying that I enjoy doing what it is, but it's not a hobby. It's a business where well, that's, I keeping track of my books has not been an easy thing for me. And I think I finally got that under control and have a really great bookkeeper that is able to use the design platform that I use and integrate with QuickBooks, because I want to be able to do that, project autopsy at the end. But if I don't have my
Yes.
numbers, I can't really do that. So, um, you know, I I don't have dreams of I'm going to have an empire or anything like that, but I am happy working basically full time. I have no thoughts that like, oh, I can't wait till I turn, X age so I can quit. I always say it's
Right.
kind of like, I mean, how many people like artists or a musician, they're like, oh, I can't wait till I never have to play the flute again. When you're doing what you really love, my goal is that I will have something that I can do and, for as long as I want to be doing it. And if I decide that I want to take the summers off or, you know, whatever but I have control over it. And, I want to, be as profitable as possible. So,
I love it.
um,
I love it. I love it. It's the absolute, like Desi always talks about, align your business with your life, right? And here you are, you're aligning and designing your business, your pipeline to do and what you want to do when and what you want to do it. It's just
mhm,
it's awesome. I also was at Las Vegas Market recently, and I ran into a woman who is in her late 60s now. I think she said to me, late 60s. She had been to one of my Power Talk Fridays back in 2017, and we ran into each other there. And I asked her how she was doing and everything. And she said, great new season of my life. She goes, I work when I want, how I want. We're both, my husband's retired, and, I'm not retired, but I can't call it work either. And just because I'm profitable doesn't mean that it's not fun, right? So it's
Mhm.
like that sort of a thing. And she says, you know what? I manage the pipeline to work in between trips that we take, and the money I make more than funds, the trips that we take. And it's just at that stage, it's like you said, it's so funny because we went to dinner with neighbors of ours a couple of weeks ago, and they told us how they went to see the Rolling Stones play
Mhm.
in Madison Square Garden or something. I mean, is he in his 80s? I mean, I think he's
Mhm.
in his 80s. You know what I mean? And they were like, he did 3 hours like a lunatic,
Mhm.
and it's like, and we were all like, how the heck could he do 3 hours? And we just really settled on it has to be a combination of he loves it. So he's
Mhm.
not out there going, oh my God, I have to do another song, right? It's like
Mhm.
you guys would design. I want to design another room. And we also agreed that he probably sleeps for the other 21 hours of the day after he
Right.
does a 3 hour show like that in his 80s.
Well, that might be more physically taxing than what I
That's
do, but
exactly. We were like, and he probably sleeps all day, the day before and the day after. So,
oh.
anyway, well, this was awesome. I just loved getting to know you so much. And I really am so glad to hear. And of course, I've heard the stories over and over again, but I never get tired of hearing the way that different people on the podcast have helped make your businesses, more enjoyable, profitable, align with your life, like Desi always says. It's just
Mhm.
outstanding, Anne. Thank you so much for sharing all this on the show today. Appreciate you.
Oh, it was my pleasure.